Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Cloud Computing Show for the C-Suite with Brad Nelson and internationally recognised and world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader, David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. In this week's show, David and I will be talking about that not so long ago, hybrid cloud seemed to be perceived as the flexible cloud option. Now, multi-cloud is the new hybrid cloud, and for the same reasons. Multi-cloud basically is part of a cloud architecture that uses more than two clouds, a private and or a public cloud such as AWS and or Microsoft. The term pluggable cloud is also creeping up on the ranks for the new cloud terms. Hi Dave, great to see you on the C-Suite show this week.
Yeah, it's great to be here too. I'm looking forward to this topic.
Yeah, me too. Should C-levels consider what's real and what's not when it comes to the public cloud? And is it becoming fake new around the technology and pluggable cloud?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think ultimately we have this kind of lore that's emerging around what I call the magical cloud technology, which really doesn't exist yet. And so the notion of having a multi-cloud is something we can build, and I've built many of those, and we can certainly put abstraction layers on them, and we can operate them in different ways, and we can secure them in very good approaches and best practices, all those sorts of things. But the idea that we can pull a cloud out of the lineup like AWS and put in Alibaba on a daily basis, or something that's pluggable, very much like we would plug our vacuum cleaner into the wall, is really just not possible at the level I think people are going to be there. And so there is this thing that's being sold in the C-suites, either by IT or the cloud providers, that if you move into a multi-cloud environment, that you can plug in any cloud you like, you can leverage any service you like, you can mix and match the systems. And by the way, if they get a little pricey or they don't return your calls, you can pull them out and put somebody else in. But the reality is, if you're going to build a cloud-based system, whether it's a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, you're going to have to make those workloads dependent or coupled to those particular public cloud providers. Whether you do them through an abstraction layer, which is fine, but typically you're going to have to do them through an API layer, which is going to bind you to the cloud native features. And so by definition, if you unplug that cloud, you're going to break your application workload. You're going to have to do some rewriting around leveraging another system, either an on-premise system or another public cloud. So it becomes very complex very quick. And I think that ultimately within the boardrooms out there, they're getting sold kind of a bill of goods, that they have this sort of agile flexibility that really is not there in the technology now. And it's very much analogous to, workload portability. We were kind of sold, a bill of goods in terms of our ability to kind of move workloads from cloud to cloud, as we need to move them. It's typically a very difficult thing to do, if not impossible, for most of the workloads out there. So I end up being the designated buzzkill, and many times in talking to the press and, and doing my blogs and, even doing this show, in terms of telling people that this really needs to be something you need to look into as to what the potential is, what the technology can really do. And that the C-suites, that's where people should call them on this to make sure that they understand that this has to be validated and make it happen, or they're going to end up watching IT run this thing into the ground when those capabilities don't show up. So this kind of thing keeps me up at night. In terms of the fake news that's out there around the capabilities of the technology, that the technology isn't ready to do. That doesn't mean the technology is not great technology, and if it's used correctly, it'll work wonders for your enterprise and save you money and make you agile and compress your time to market. However, if you put this, put the kind of investment into this stuff, assuming that this stuff is going to work in this manner, it just won't, and you'll end up being disappointed and fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is quite a massive difference between AWS and the storage within Microsoft, Google and Alibaba. So it's kind of making something pluggable between the three, just those three alone, is just not a reality at all, is it?
No, it's not. It's not, unless you maybe run one application and then you've abstracted the heck out of it so it has no access to any native features and those sorts of things, and maybe it can be, pluggable, or if you're running an application with inside a container. But, very few applications are containerized as of now. So if it's a standard rank and file pedestrian application, something built on a LAMP stack, for example, and it's a Linux-based app and Apache and MySQL, and we moved in Python, we moved it into a cloud. it's going to be coupled to that particular cloud because it has to be coupled to the particular platform native services in order for it to get moving. And so I can't really kind of put in another platform analog that's going to be exactly like the environment where the application's running. And I certainly can't pull the sheets out from under an application that's in operational production. And so those sorts of things really kind of get in the way. And so it's something that people need to think about. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to walk down the aisle with your particular cloud provider. You can decouple these things, but the difficulty in decoupling these things and plugging in other clouds, taking out AWS and putting in Alibaba, or taking out Microsoft and putting in AWS, is much more difficult and much more of a costly effort and a risky effort than most people understand. So pick your architecture that you're moving toward, leverage your architecture, understand that changing your architecture after the fact, after you do the installation and the migration of those applications, is going to be way more difficult than I think the press is letting us understand.
Okay, so don't be fooled by the pluggable. It's not so pluggable. Let's lose that word and everyone stop freaking out over pluggable clouds.
Yeah, it'd be nice, and portability, which is sold by a lot of the cloud providers, would also be nice. And it would, I'd love to see a unicorn and all those sorts of things. And I like to fly someday, but I can't. So I'm basically dealing with these limitations of gravity, and you have to deal with limitations of the particular technology. And technology is typically always going to be promoted as something that's a little better than it actually is. And in this case, I think the corporations that are making the investments in this, based on assuming that this is something that's going to be a possibility, they just need to make that assumption. They just need to look at that assumption, because typically it's not going to be true.
Yeah, I think until they've worked out the remapping workload of how that can be a pluggable facilitation for cloud providers, it's just not going to be feasible, is it? Having the hybrid and on-site, off-site, public clouds, that's great. We understand that, but plugging them in and out just because someone changes their pricing structure or or whatever it would be that doesn't meet the SLAs is just not feasible for such a quick, instantaneous of flicking that switch, is it?
No, and I've sat in many presentations that I've cringed without, shouting at somebody, where they said you can, plug in a new cloud every day, for the next, 20 years, and it'll, work the same, and you can, mix and match your technology. And it really looks good on the PowerPoint presentation that the person's running, but, having lived the life of actually making this stuff work within the Global 2000 enterprises, I'm telling you right now that the limitations are just too great and the risk too much, that we need to kind of throttle these expectations back. And the reason this is in the C-suite show, because I need somebody to call, BS on this stuff, and I think the C-suites need to do it. And so they need to second guess a lot of the strategic investments that are being proposed by IT, based on, what I call the magical service. And the reality is it's an old rule of thumb, but I use it here. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is not true.
Yep, it's very true. Very true. It's so very true. It's almost good to be true. I think if that makes any form of sense, in a form of sense of humour.
It does.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, thanks again for being part of the show, man. It's always great to have you on board.
My pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the C-Suite Show. Remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our weekly shows. And also you can find David on Twitter, which is @David Linthicum, and myself on Twitter, which is Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks again for watching.